Oh, what a wealth of riches we have in the scriptures today, but it is consistently known by those who have been around long enough to see the cycles of the scriptures as Good Shepherd Sunday. And we get these lessons about the shepherd, Jesus talking about himself as the Good Shepherd. We read the 23rd Psalm, which is about a shepherd. They were into sheep. In those days in Israel. Not many cattle ranchers in those days and in that place. But it's a particularly touching Sunday every year for me because the little congregation church I grew up in was named the Church of the Good Shepherd. And now there wasn't a sheep in all of Terry County or was maybe within 300 miles of where I grew up, but this story still resonates for everybody. So if we just let that, I'm just going to let him say what he said. I'll come back to a couple of pieces of it. But what I want to say is that his statements about being the shepherd is this huge, it's a hugely familiar metaphor for us, but a very easy one for people in his own culture and time to relate to and to understand the difference between somebody who says, I'm getting paid minimum wage. You think I'm fighting this wolf with this stick? Now the owner of the sheep says, just try it. And it's just this different attitude about Jesus seeing us as his own. But if we're his own, then, and this is the metaphor he uses to express that, then the words of 1 John are more didactic. Now that doesn't mean bad, it just means teaching. It's more straightforward teaching. And he says some of the most profound things, and at least for me, expresses the deep heart of the gospel. We know love by this, that he laid down his life for us. And then he says, and we ought to lay down our lives for one another. Because how does God's love abide in someone who has the world's good and sees a brother or sister in need and yet refuses help? And this is only one example. This isn't the whole how do we express love. But he gives this example because he wants us to know that laying down our lives doesn't mean everybody has to go die, literally, physically. It is not intended by Jesus that we be a cult of martyrs. There have been through the centuries many martyrs who were killed because of their faith, but that's not what we seek. We seek life and life abundant. And so if we're going to have that, then he says that we have to find those ways. And I start thinking about, how many ways there are that people lay their lives down for one another, the sacrifices that parents make for their children, the reach with which we will go to comfort and take care of those we know when they're ill or down and out. There are so many different ways to do it than just dying. And frankly, Jesus didn't really want anybody else to have to. He wants us to die to ourselves so that we can see a brother or sister not just as my blood relative, brother and sister, my blood siblings, but as anyone who is a child of God, which is pretty much everybody. So it always starts there with that sense of, are we going to do it? And he expresses this to us, little children, let us love not in word or speech, but in truth and action. Little children, let us love. How do we know what that love is? Especially further along in life when we've seen a lot of badness. I mean, nobody here is unfamiliar with loving the people you're close to. That's not what's at question here. But he says, I'll sum it up in my bumper sticker is, love is as love does. That's what the scripture, love is as love does. So I can have all the sentiment and say all the romantic things and quote, reams of poetry, but if I treat you indifferently or abusively, then the actions are what's the truth, not my sentiment or my words. And that's a pretty simple concept too. We know that's not a hard one for us to grasp, that we can't just say we love people, we have to demonstrate that by our actions towards them. And then, by extension, we say, yes, in my little world, is centered around me and a few other blood relatives, and then it kind of expands to friends and cousins, then it expands, and then it expands to just how I treat people in my daily moving through life. Do I see the cashier? Do I see the guy with the mop? Do I see the special needs person who's stocking the shelves? Or do I see those whose language is not our own? Not just as utility, they're doing work that needs to be done, but children of God. It's almost overwhelming to go to the supermarket and say, everybody I see from the time I go in the parking lot till I leave is a child of God. How differently might we see them? But then again, how do we respond if there's an opportunity for love? When we act like that, we have to draw on something we know. And there are people who their biggest problem in life, the reason they're the way they are is because they've never experienced genuine love as a human being. That distorts us immensely. To be loved makes us who we are. So in the Church of the Good Shepherd, which started with a little tea party in my parents' living room in 1953, right before I was born, they picked this name for whatever reason. It was one that comforted them. The Episcopal Church was planted in the midst of the Bible Belt, right on the buckle. And the Episcopal Church was the tiny cult on the wrong side of town. We were not the big downtown church with the spires and the stained glass windows. We were, to everybody from us up, if there were any Christian Scientists, we might have been more than them. But the Church of the Nazarene, way bigger than us. Foursquare Gospel, way bigger than us. And I haven't even got to Methodist, Presbyterian, First Baptist, and Calvary. Everybody was bigger than us. 40 people would stuff this little building. But in that little building, I learned I was loved by something larger than my family. I had a good family. My grandparents loved me, my uncles, aunt. I didn't lack for care. That's a lovely thing. But you start to find that there's a bigger circle as you grow up. And my bigger circle was this little group of people at the Church of the Good Shepherd in Brownfield. I got to run the vacuum cleaner. I got to be an acolyte. I got to help mow the lawn. I got to eat honeysuckles at Easter. I got to be baptized and confirmed in that little congregation. And I know I was loved because of something they did. And I couldn't name it as a child. What child can name what it is? Except as an adult I can say I was entirely safe. It was a small group, kind of like this, Everybody knew every kid's name. Everybody knew what the rules were and how people were supposed to behave, and every adult took care of every child, and no running in the church. You know, it was on the aisle was only that long, but you weren't supposed to run in it. So we learned those things. They did it not just in the words, which were in those days Elizabethan English morning prayer most of the time, and the scriptures, you know, the same thing. And I would kneel on the kneeler, and the top of the pew was here. So I didn't have a lot of real intellectual contact. But at that child level, I knew I was safe, I belonged, that I was loved, that there were things that were done to make our little child lives better. And probably every one of us, once or twice, were taken by the shoulder, the arm, and taken out the back door, in which some kind of discipline was administered in order to correct behaviors that were unacceptable. And that's just the way it was. It was love. Now the thing is that little child in us, if you've had that place, if it's in you, and you know that life can start battering that little child. It's so vulnerable, it's so fragile. It's pure and true, but it's fragile. And we get banged up and beat up, and we get disappointed, and we disappoint others, and we see the news, and on and on and on, so that there comes a time where living in that kind of love just doesn't seem possible, and it certainly doesn't seem reasonable. And we wall ourselves up. And we wall ourselves up so that we begin not to see the stock boy or the dishwasher or any of those as people. People start to become tools to get me what I want. Because the more I withdraw from the place of love, the more selfish I become. I'm the only thing I'm relating to. I'm the only person I'm relating to, and I'm doing everything I do, I think, for that person. We go through times like that. Maybe it's just 5 minutes. Sometimes it's longer periods. And our hearts begin to carry wounds that we self-inflicted and circumstance-inflicted. These wounds can cause us depression, sadness, anger, can cause us to look for places to hide, bad relationships, substances. Whatever it is, we begin not to believe in truth and action out of love. We begin to believe that the world is out to get me and I have to protect myself from it. How do we break out of that? Because when we do that, we in the end have these things that we know we've participated in, and every now and then, I don't know about you, I mean, some of y'all must probably have very naturally sunny dispositions, but I'm kind of an Eeyore at times. And when I don't feel good, when things aren't going right, you know, I can spiral into this place where I start to say, you know, it's not just that things aren't going the way I want it, there's something wrong with me. Somehow, if I was better or more or greater or more holy or purer or had avoided all these mistakes that I made, if only I'd done all of that, then maybe I'd be worthy of God. And John says no to that. By this we know that we're from the truth. When we act in love towards another person, what we find is that God will reassure our hearts before Him whenever our hearts condemn us. This just struck me. I've never preached on this particular thing. The idea that part of what afflicts us in sin is what we do to ourselves, our own condemnation of our own imperfections. And it's actually a spiritual pride that says, I know better than God. I know what I deserve. God's being too soft. So if God's not going to do it, I will. I will keep hitting my head in the hammer in the head. I will just do that. But the truth is, and it just struck me, is that God is greater than our hearts. Us feeling types can begin to believe that our heart is the direction, or is the Spirit, or is God. And again, I start being selfish. But it says God's greater than my heart, and even when I lie in the middle of the night and think not so well of myself, God is greater than that. God's decision is greater than that. He knows everything, and he says, if you can just let go of all of that and have what? Hearts that do not condemn us. A purified conscience, not by having done perfectly, but by being perfectly cleansed. If I can take that, then what? We have boldness. Not cringing, not crawling, not hiding, not disappearing, but boldly saying, God, what are you going to do about this mess of a world we live in? That's a Jewish prayer. Go watch, Tavia. Somebody tell me the name of it. Thanks. Fiddler on the Roof, and listen to Tavia talk to God. Boldness before the Lord is what we're given. We get to be the child that comes and yanks on the hem and says, Daddy, I need something. We have boldness, and if we ask, and if we love, and if we act, what we need will be given us. That's the final promise. Even if it comes to death, we will receive what we need from him who is greater than our hearts. The Easter story is way more than just the story. It is a truth that expresses in love, and love is as love does.